Have you ever noticed that some of the most beautiful souls you've ever met just vanished? They didn't announce it. They didn't burn bridges. They didn't slam doors. There is a quiet leaving happening all around you, and most people don't even notice it. It doesn't look like rebellion. It doesn't look like collapse. It doesn't look dramatic enough to make the news. It looks like someone deleting their social apps and not telling anyone. It looks like a person who used to argue passionately suddenly choosing silence. It looks like a bright, creative soul deciding they don't want to play the game anymore. This is the silent exodus. Spiritually awake people are not storming out of the world flipping tables and shouting truths. They are slipping out the side door with a soft breath and a tired smile. They're not trying to punish society. They're trying to protect their sanity. Because once you wake up, the noise becomes unbearable. You start to hear how frantic everything sounds. The constant urgency, the endless outrage, the competition disguised as ambition, the fear dressed up as productivity. Everyone is running somewhere, but nobody can explain where they're actually going. And when you finally see that, really see it, something inside you just goes, can't do this anymore. Not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, but because your nervous system can't pretend it's okay with madness anymore. So you start stepping back, you stop watching the news because your soul can't digest 24-hour panic. You stop arguing online because you realize nobody is listening anyway. You stop chasing trends because they feel empty 5 minutes after you catch them. You don't announce this shift, you don't make a manifesto, you just quietly opt out. And people around you think you've changed. They think you've become distant. They think you've become boring. But what actually happened is far more radical. You stopped feeding illusions. You stopped feeding the illusion that being busy means being important. You stopped feeding the illusion that money equals worth. You stopped feeding the illusion that louder means smarter. And the world doesn't know what to do with someone who won't clap for nonsense anymore. So it keeps spinning, it keeps screaming, it keeps selling. And you keep drifting away, not in anger, in grief. Because here's the painful part nobody talks about. Spiritually awake people don't leave the world because they hate it. They leave because they love it too much to watch it destroy itself. They feel the pain behind people's cruelty. They feel the terror behind people's greed. They feel the emptiness behind people's addictions. And that level of awareness hurts. It hurts to see through smiles. It hurts to hear trauma and jokes. It hurts to walk into shopping malls and feel how desperate everyone is to fill a hole they can't name. So the awakened soul chooses quiet, not as an escape, as an act of mercy. They retreat into nature, into books, into meditation, into long walks and long silences. Not because they're giving up on humanity, but because they are trying to remember what humanity even is. And here's the twist: from the outside, it looks like they're disappearing. But from the inside, they are finally arriving in their own body, arriving in their own breath, arriving in their own truth. They are shedding the version of themselves that was built to survive a broken system. They are becoming someone new, someone quieter, softer, clearer, more dangerous to illusions. So if someone you loved seems to have vanished into the background of life, they haven't left you. They've left the noise, and maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for a world that's ready to meet them in truth instead of performance. There is a special kind of loneliness that comes with waking up, and it doesn't feel like the loneliness people talk about. It doesn't always mean you're physically alone. You can be in a room full of friends, family, coworkers, people who love you and still feel like you're on a different planet. Because spiritually awake people don't just see the world differently, they feel it differently. They hear conversations and notice what isn't being said. They watch people laugh and feel the sadness hiding underneath. They listen to dreams and feel the fear behind the ambition. And once that sensitivity turns on, it doesn't turn off. So you sit there at dinner tables and meetings at parties, nodding politely, smiling at the right moments. But inside you're thinking, is anyone else feeling how empty this all feels? You want to talk about meaning, about death, about love, about consciousness, about why we're really here. But everyone else wants to talk about money, gossip, problems they secretly enjoy, and goals they don't even believe in. So you stay quiet. Not because you think you're better than them, not because you're judging them, but because you don't want to be the strange one who ruins the vibe. And that's where the loneliness begins. You realize you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't go back to caring about shallow things the way you used to. You can't fake excitement about things that now feel meaningless. So you start editing yourself. You soften your words. You hide your depth. You pretend you're still interested in the same old conversations. And that pretending slowly drains your life force. Because there's nothing more exhausting than being surrounded by people while feeling completely unseen. Spiritually awake people often feel like emotional orphans. Not because they don't have families, but because nobody around them speaks their inner language anymore. They crave one real conversation more than 1,000 polite ones. They crave one soul-level connection more than a room full of acquaintances. And when they don't get that, they start withdrawing. They stop reaching out first. They stop explaining themselves. They stop trying to bridge a gap nobody else seems to notice. And the world interprets that withdrawal as arrogance or depression. But it's neither. It's heartbreak. It's the heartbreak of realizing that awakening separates you from the very people you love most. You still love them. You still care about them. You still want the best for them. But you can no longer meet them in the same place. So you sit alone more often. Not because you hate people, but because solitude hurts less than being misunderstood. And here's the cruel irony: the more awake you become, the more compassion you feel. You understand why people are the way they are. You see their wounds, you see their conditioning, you see their fear. Which means you can't even be angry at them anymore. You just feel alone. Alone with your awareness. Alone with your questions. Alone with your depth, and nobody prepares you for this part of the journey. They talk about bliss. They talk about enlightenment. They talk about peace. They don't talk about sitting on your bed at night feeling like the last human on earth. They don't talk about grieving the version of your life where you fit in. They don't talk about how awakening feels like emotional puberty at 40. But here's the quiet truth hidden inside this loneliness. It's not a punishment. It's an initiation. It's life clearing space around you for people who can actually meet you where you are now. It's your soul saying, stop shrinking, stop pretending, stop settling for half connections. So if you feel unbearably alone lately, if you feel like nobody really gets you anymore, you're not broken. You're early, you're ahead of your environment. And yes, it hurts. But one day you're going to meet someone who looks at you and says, I see you. I feel what you feel. I've been alone too. And in that moment, all this loneliness will finally make sense. There comes a moment in awakening that feels almost embarrassing in hindsight. A moment when you realize how much of your life was a performance. How many choices you made just to be liked. How many dreams you chased just to be admired. How many versions of yourself you created just to survive socially. And it hits you like a quiet punch to the chest. I've been auditioning for love. Spiritually awake people slowly wake up to the fact that they were living for applause they didn't even enjoy receiving. They notice how good it feels when people approve of them, and how empty it feels 5 minutes later. They notice how addictive validation is, how it tricks you into confusing attention with connection, how it convinces you that being seen is the same as being loved. So at first, they try to do it better. They try to be more impressive, more spiritual, more successful, more interesting. But eventually something breaks inside them. They realize they are exhausted from trying to be someone worth clapping for. They realize they've been curating a personality instead of living a life. And that's when the real shift begins. They stop saying things just to sound smart. They stop posting things just to be praised. They stop agreeing with people just to be included. And it's terrifying because applause was their oxygen. Without it, silence rushes in. And silence forces you to meet the version of yourself that exists when nobody is watching. No filters. No scripts. No audience. Just you and your truth. And that truth is often awkward. It says, I don't actually care about this career. I don't actually like these conversations. I don't actually want this lifestyle. So they start choosing depth over applause. They choose conversations that go somewhere instead of ones that get laughs. They choose honesty over likability. They choose peace over popularity. And suddenly they start losing people. Not because they became cruel, but because they became real. They stop performing emotional labor to keep everyone comfortable. They stop being the funny one, the strong one, the agreeable one. They start saying things like, I don't feel aligned with that. That doesn't feel true to me. I need space. And people don't let people pull away from that, because the world is built to reward performance, not authenticity. So spiritually awake people experience a strange grief. They grieve the attention they used to get. They grieve the invitations that stop coming. They grieve the feeling of being wanted. But underneath that grief is a new kind of relief. Relief from not having to pretend anymore. Relief from not having to sell themselves. Relief from not having to earn the right to exist. They begin to feel a deeper, quieter joy. The joy of waking up and not having to impress anyone today. The joy of speaking slowly and meaning what they say. The joy of saying no without explaining themselves. And here's the dangerous part, once you taste that freedom, you can't go back. You can't go back to chasing approval like a drug. You can't go back to shaping your soul to fit into someone else's expectations. So your life starts looking smaller from the outside. Fewer friends, fewer parties, fewer achievements to brag about. But on the inside of your life becomes enormous, full of stillness, full of clarity, full of self-respect. And the world calls you boring, but your nervous system calls you safe. And that's when you understand something profound. Applause is loud, but alignment is quiet. And quiet finally feels like home. There is a heaviness that comes with waking up that nobody warns you about. It doesn't come from sadness exactly, it comes from sensitivity. From suddenly feeling everything too clearly, too deeply, too honestly. Spiritually awake people don't grow thicker skin. They grow thinner skin. They become emotionally porous. They walk into a grocery store and feel the exhaustion in the cashier's smile. They sit next to someone on a bus and feel the grief they're trying not to cry about. They watch a commercial and feel the hunger behind the manipulation. And their nervous system starts ringing like an alarm bell that never shuts off. Because awareness doesn't just open your mind, it opens your heart. And once your heart is open, the world is loud in a whole new way. You start noticing cruelty that everyone else calls normal. You start noticing dishonesty that everyone else calls polite. You start noticing desperation that everyone else calls ambition. And it hurts. It hurts to see how casually people hurt each other. It hurts to see how numb everyone has become just to survive. It hurts to see how lonely people are even when they're surrounded by others. So spiritually awake people get tired in a way sleep can't fix. They're not tired because they did too much. They're tired because they felt too much. They carry invisible weight. The weight of other people's emotions. The weight of collective anxiety. The weight of unsaid grief in every room they enter. And because they're empathetic, they don't just feel it, they absorb it. They go home after a normal day and collapse on the bed wondering, why am I so exhausted? I barely did anything. But they did something. They held the emotional atmosphere of an entire world. So they start protecting their energy. They cancel plans not because they're antisocial, but because their soul is socially bruised. They stop answering messages right away, not because they don't care, but because every interaction costs more than it used to. They avoid crowds, they avoid small talk, they avoid chaos, not because they think they're above it, but because their nervous system is in survival mode. And then the guilt kicks in. They feel guilty for needing so much rest. They feel guilty for not being as available as they used to be. They feel guilty for pulling away from people who need them. But here's the truth, nobody told them high empathy in a low consciousness world is a form of chronic pain. It's like walking barefoot through a city made of broken glass. So spiritually awake people start building quiet lives. They choose dim lighting over bright screens. They choose slow mornings over loud nights. They choose deep conversations over group chats. They become boring on purpose, because chaos feels like violence to their nervous system now. And yes, from the outside it looks like they're becoming fragile. But they're not fragile, they're finely tuned instruments in a world that keeps slamming doors. So they retreat, not because they can't handle life, but because life isn't handling them gently. They retreat into nature, into solitude, into stillness. They take long showers, long walks, long breaks from people, not because they hate the world, but because they are trying not to drown in it. And here's the secret hidden inside this sensitivity: it's not a weakness. It's a superpower with no safety manual. It's the ability to feel life deeply, to love deep, to connect deeply, to heal deeply. But only if they learn boundaries, only if they learn to stop carrying what isn't theirs, only if they learn that protecting their energy is not selfish. It's survival. So if you feel exhausted all the time, if noise feels physically painful, if people drain you in ways you can't explain, you're not broken, you're awake. And your sensitivity is not the problem. The problem is a world that forgot how to be gentle. There comes a point in awakening where you realize something that feels almost rebellious. You are allowed to leave, not leave the planet. Not abandon everyone you love, but leave the version of life that is quietly killing your soul. Spiritually awake people reach a moment where their body starts telling the truth their mouth was too afraid to say. Their chest tightens when they walk into certain rooms. Their stomach drops when they open certain messages. Their energy collapses when they think about certain obligations. And they finally understand, this life I built to survive is not the life I'm meant to live. So they start disappearing from things that once defined them. They quit jobs that look impressive but feel dead. They step back from friendships built on trauma bonding instead of love. They stop attending events that require them to wear a fake personality, and everyone panics. What's wrong with you? You're being selfish? You're throwing your life away? You're going through a phase? But what's really happening is something far more sacred. They are choosing inner freedom over external approval. They are choosing peace over performance. They are choosing their nervous system over society's expectations. And it feels terrifying, because for the first time in their life, they are not being driven by fear. Not fear of being alone. Not fear of being judged. Not fear of disappointing people. They are being driven by alignment, by a quiet inner voice that says, this isn't you anymore. So they let things fall apart. They let routines collapse. They let identities dissolve. They let relationships drift, not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Because they finally understand something radical: staying in a life that makes you sick is not loyalty, it's self-betrayal. And spiritually awake people are done betraying themselves. They stop over-explaining their boundaries. They stop justifying their need for space. They stop apologizing for changing. They start saying no. No to conversations that drain them. No to responsibilities that aren't theirs. No to roles they were forced into as children. And yes, they look like they're giving up on life. But they're not giving up. They're opting out of suffering they no longer need. They're realizing that disappearing from the world sometimes isn't depression. Sometimes it's detox. Detox from chaos. Detox from manipulation. Detox from constant stimulation. They simplify their life until they can finally breathe again. Fewer commitments, fewer possessions, fewer people with access to their energy. And in that emptiness, something miraculous happens. Their intuition comes back online. Their creativity starts whispering again. Their body relaxes for the first time in years. They start sleeping deeply. They start laughing for no reason. They start feeling joy that isn't dependent on outcomes. Oh, this is what peace feels like. This is why spiritually awake people disappear. Not because they can't handle life, but because they refuse to live a lie. They are not running from responsibility. They are running toward authenticity. They are not avoiding pain. They are choosing a pain that heals instead of a pain that rots. And yes, they lose people in the process. They lose versions of themselves too. But what they gain is something most humans never taste: the inner freedom. The freedom to wake up and live according to their truth. The freedom to rest without guilt. The freedom to exist without performing. So if you feel the urge to pull away from the world, if you feel like your old life doesn't fit anymore, if you feel like you're standing at the edge of everything you know, you're not falling apart, you're breaking out. And sometimes the disappearing is the bravest thing you'll ever do. There is a moment, usually after a long season of silence, where something inside a spiritually awake person starts stirring again. Not the old hunger for attention, not the old need to prove anything, but a quieter, steadier pull that says, okay, it's time to re-enter the world, not as who you used to be, but as who you actually are, because the disappearing was never meant to be permanent. It was a cocoon. It was the dark, quiet place where your nervous system finally felt safe enough to heal, where your identity finally loosened its grip, where your soul finally had enough silence to speak. And in that silence, you didn't just rest, you died a little. You let old dreams die, you let old roles die. You let old versions of yourself that survived on approval and fear quietly starve. And now something new is breathing inside you. You notice it when you walk into a room and don't feel the urge to impress anyone. You notice it when someone disrespects you and you don't need to defend yourself. You notice it when chaos is happening around you and your body stays calm. That's not numbness, that's sovereignty. That's what happens when your sense of self is no longer outsourced to the world. So when spiritually awake people come back, they come back different. They don't come back loud, they don't come back preaching, they don't come back trying to save anyone. They come back grounded, they come back with eyes that listen more than they talk. They come back with words that land softly but hit deeply. They come back with a presence that regulates rooms without saying a thing. And people feel it. They don't know why they suddenly feel safer around you. They don't know why they start telling you their secrets. They don't know why your calm annoys and comforts them at the same time. But it's because you're no longer leaking fear into the atmosphere. You're carrying coherence. You're carrying truth that's been lived, not memorized, so you don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your life becomes the message. The way you say no without cruelty, the way you love without clinging, the way you leave situations that don't align without burning bridges. And here's the part that will surprise you: the world is starving for people like this. Not influencers, not gurus, not loud revolutionaries, but humans who are regulated, embodied, honest, and awake. You become a walking permission slip. People around you start slowing down, start questioning their own lives, start feeling their own pain instead of running from it. Not because you told them to, but because your nervous system is modeling a different way to exist. This is the return with purpose. Not a mission to fix the world, but a willingness to be visible again without selling your soul. You take a job, but you don't let it define your worth. You enter relationships, but you don't abandon yourself to keep them. You engage with society, but you don't swallow its insanity anymore. You move through the world like someone who knows who they are, and that is quietly revolutionary. So if you've been hiding, if you've been healing, if you've been in your own private wilderness, and lately you felt that subtle itch to come back out into life, that's not your ego. That's your integration phase beginning. That's your soul saying, you don't need to isolate anymore. You can be here now without losing yourself. And no, you're not coming back to fit in. You're coming back to hold a frequency. To be a lighthouse without trying to be one. To be a reminder, just by existing, that sanity is still possible in this world. So step back in. Gently, slowly, on your own terms. The world doesn't need a louder you, it needs the real you. And the real you is finally ready. If you got even 1% motivation from this video, then please subscribe to my YouTube channel Unstoppable Growth so that I can be encouraged.